Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this joint event with Coventry University and your Coventry and Warwickshire Chamber of Commerce. My name is Sean Rose, and I'm the Head of Policy at the Chamber, and we are very glad to welcome you all to this event this morning. As you know, our event today is driving the future of greener transport in Coventry and Warwickshire, and we are going to tackle how our region is leading on the design, the implementation and rollout of clean transport, and how we can play our role in helping the UK reach its net zero target by 2050. That target has now been enshrined in law. To cover these topics, we're going to be joined by Paul Herriotts, who is Professor of Transport Design at the National Design Centre at Coventry University, who will be talking to us about transport design during the pandemic of COVID-19. We will then be hearing from Denise Osborne and Shamala Evans, who are both from Coventry City Council, who will talk us through the city's clean transport strategy and how Coventry plans to become the electric city. And last but by no means least, we will be hearing from Mark Pawsey MP, who is the Member of Parliament for Rugby and also holds a seat on the Business Select Committee, and personally has lobbied for an increase in the availability of charging points to help consumers make that switch from fossil fuels to electric. There will be a chance for those of you who have joined us today to ask questions of our speakers at the end of their presentations. So please do post these questions in the chat facility, and we will do our best to get through as many of the questions as possible. We will be recording this event today, so if you would prefer not to be seen, please do turn off your camera, and so you won't be on our YouTube pages or on our Facebooks. So to kick off this morning's session, I'm going to hand over to Paul from Coventry University. Paul, over to you.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for that introduction. Let me just make sure that you can see my slides okay. Is that all right? Yep, that's great. Well, thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me this morning. And obviously, we're going to be hearing about wonderful initiatives towards that carbon neutral future. And I wanted to take a slightly different stance and to think about people. So often we talk about technology and how technology can inform this wonderful new future. And I just want to remind us a little bit about people in the process and how we need to include people in our thinking. Okay, so in the presentation this morning, there are a couple of things that I'm going to cover. So firstly, I'll just give you a very brief introduction to the Future Mobility Group at Coventry University, and I will let you know a little bit about my specialism of design ergonomics and human factors. And then for the thrust of the presentation, I'll talk about post-COVID-19. We hope we have post-COVID-19. We'll talk about what will public transport look like, and I'll show you our post-pandemic pod that we have proposed at the university. Okay, let's have a quick look at some slides showing those things then. So just a little introduction. I'm almost contractually obliged to tell you what we do at the university, so I'll just give a moment or two doing that. Within the Future Transport and Cities Institute, we have a Future Mobility Group. And fundamentally, we are seeing a huge amount of technology developing in the transport sector. And really, we're going to see that that technology is going to inform a sea change in the way people, goods and services are moved. And it's really going to be a dramatic change. And you know, sadly, we heard this week, didn't we, about, you know, a Tesla autopilot accident. You know, this technology is coming. We need to think really about how people interact with that technology. And that's a sad example of perhaps a poor interaction. So we've put together a multidisciplinary team. And really what we're doing is applying cutting edge, robust, scientific methods to look at this change in transport. And really our aspiration is that everyone in society will benefit from this innovation that's happening, and we want to be really part of that innovation, which we believe will lead to safer roads, cleaner cities, and will transform how people and goods move around the world. All right, and we'll just finalise this part with a little bit about the design ergonomics and HMI groups. So I lead design ergonomics. So we're really about user-centred transport design, designing for people and that wide range of people in the population. So not just young males as car design is traditionally designed for, but really putting users at the heart of the design process. And we take an inclusive view. So we really have a focus on people who are older in the population, people who have age-related disabilities, wider population groups with disabilities who are often neglected in transport design. And we really include those in our transport design processes. And then finally, I just mentioned visualization. So one of the big things we do at the university and at the National Transport Design Centre is to try and bring designs to life through new visualization methods. And in particular, you can see some of the images at the bottom. We're using virtual reality, so we can put people into a virtual reality environment and show them a new transport system at a very, very early stage of the design. And we can really bring that to life so that we can get good feedback and make changes early on. Okay. I'm just going to show you one more slide here, which tells you a little bit about what we do. So that's our lovely design studio that we have at the university. And that wooden structure that you see is a model of a pod that we worked on with Hariba Myra, one of our local companies that you may well be aware of. We have a good association with them. And in this project, one of our PhD students was looking at the design of a last mile mobility pod. And here you can see that we were ensuring with participants that would be accessible for people in wheelchairs. Okay, so that's a little flavour of what we do at the university. And now we'll move on to the thrust of the presentation, which is talking about how public transport can play a critical role in supporting the UK net zero ambitions. And, you know, even prior to COVID-19, we were working hard to put people at the centre of our designs and to ensure that we're not technology led, but that we're led by people and designing for people and what people want. And we feel now that this is even more important in a post-COVID world. We believe that passenger experience has become a determining factor of what form of transport a person chooses. And our recent research is showing that people's concerns today are about their COVID safety. So safety and cleanliness of public transport are becoming real passenger experience issues. And unless we address those issues, we won't be getting people back into public transport. So we did a survey last year at the National Transport Design Centre at the university, and we had around 1,200 respondents nationwide. So quite a large survey, and those kind of numbers give us faith in the answers that we get. And we were seeing people tell us that, you know, pre-pandemic, there's around 8% of people that would never take public transport. And that number has increased now to 12%. So we're seeing a change there. You know, there's a significant group of people that say they would never use public transport. And these are the people perhaps who enjoy the bubble of being in their own cars, their Range Rovers or whatever else driving to work. You know, how do we get those people onto public transport? Because that's a critical thing that we must do. And we're seeing the same thing happening in the States. If we look at research there, we see that you know, what's termed the risk of infection is really informing the decisions of transport choice by the vast majority of people. So these are the challenges that we're currently faced. How do we get trust back in public transport from the general public? Okay, so we talked about visualization. This is a pod that we have proposed. We did this over the summer last year when, it seems a long time ago, doesn't it, when we were in the first throes of COVID-19 and really trying to understand what that meant. And we chose to showcase some science-based innovations in this kind of post-pandemic pod. But I should say some of the things I'm going to show you could equally be applied to a bus or a train or a plane, any of the conventional forms of transport could be implementing some of these things today in an attempt to get trust back. As always, we're adopting a user-centered approach, and I was just telling some of our colleagues earlier, we're just going to produce some models of this pod. We're going to be showing them to the public over the summer in Coventry at the Transport Museum, and we're going to do a little interactive app and try and get some public understanding of what elements of this design they like, which they don't like, and then we'll try and implement those onto whether it's a bus or a minibus or whatever, and try out a project like that. Okay, so let's look at some of those features now. So the first thing, of course, the message we had from the government last year was all about surfaces being a form of transmission. We have a different understanding, perhaps scientifically now, but that very, very strong message has impacted on people, and there's still a feeling that surfaces can be contaminated, and that's a form of transmission. Now, that may or may not be true, but if that's people's perceptions, we need to overcome that. So what we've done in this pod is we've designed something that can be summoned from your own smartphone or own device. You don't have to share a device in order to summon this. And the great thing is you can personalize this pod before it comes to you. Okay, let's just have a look at that. So you can see the inside of the pod, and we've got these multitude of screens. They're almost like Japanese shoji screens, if that means anything. You know, those light sliding panels they have. And what we can do is actually configure this pod. So depending on how many people want to use it, we can give people their own little space within a greater shared area. And that again can be configured on their own phone. Okay, and looking at some of the technology that we're investigating, obviously we now have an understanding about UV light. So we really want the pod to be cleaned by UV light before it meets any of the public that it's going to be taking around. The other element that we've looked at is what we call clean surfaces. So from a design perspective, when we talk about a clean surface, we're really talking about very simple, uncluttered surfaces. So for example, we wouldn't want any kind of stitching on the seat material, because stitching can allow little dimples that attract dirt. So we're thinking about how we construct things and the use of materials that repel dirt and are easy to clean. Now, this is a key finding for us. So on the outside of the pod, we have a display. Now, this could be a bus stop equally. So if I'm at a bus stop and I see something that says the next bus arrives in 2 minutes, it was cleaned 40 minutes ago and it's 80% full, or I can get on the bus 10 minutes later, that's only 20% full and it was cleaned half an hour ago. By giving people live updates about the status of the transport. So the two things that we feel are super important are the status of cleanliness and the number of people traveling. That data is held by transport companies. So if we can communicate that to people who are traveling, that will give them confidence back. And we're looking at ways of people getting on without having to touch surfaces. So perhaps the door that automatically opens as somebody approaches. There's even, I was just talking to somebody in Dubai and their transport system that's looking at their buses automatically taking people's temperature as they walk in. So that kind of technology is available. And then, of course, our understanding of fresh air has changed, hasn't it? So we want to have some kind of ram air ducts to allow fresh air in. There's a lot happening in Japan at the moment with their train services. So on Japanese trains, certainly the local trains, they're running with windows a third open in order to promote airflow. People on the trains are cold, but they're very happy because that's been communicated as a measure to decrease the likelihood of transmission. And then finally, I just mentioned some materials. So we've proposed copper as a material. So copper is used in some medical applications. It's antiviral and antibacterial. When we proposed this last summer, this perhaps looked quite novel. You may have seen Jaguar Land Rover announce they are doing an bacterial interior on their cars coming up. We've obviously spoken to them about this kind of proposal over the last few months. And I'm just going to skip now and let this little image run. So I talked about our visualization techniques at the university. I hope you enjoy this. It's just a minute or so. And this is an animation showing our pod. And we'll just go through some of those points that I just raised to you. And of course, the lovely thing for us is we haven't built anything yet, but by doing an animation like this, we can bring it to life and we can get good feedback from the public about some of these features. So that's my presentation this morning. So thank you very much. I hope you found that interesting. That's used up my 15 minutes, Sean. So I'll be strict there and stop there. And hopefully, if you find that of interest, I can take some questions later. Thanks very much.
Paul, thank you very much for that presentation. It shows that the future is here now, and the things that our region has, such as 5G, is making this possible. And it's so interesting to see that our university, a leading world university, has adapted its plans due to this COVID pandemic. And it's amazing to see that thought process is going in to make sure that people are safe. And I really thank you for that presentation. It was really insightful. Next, we're going to move on to Coventry Council, so our City Council, who are going to talk about our electric city and the plans that our local authorities have going forward. So Denise and Shamala, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Just hope you can see my slides. Okay. Well, good morning to everyone. Coventry City Council are pleased to be here today to talk to you about how we're reducing our emissions across the city. We understand that a safe, sustainable and reliable transport system is essential to the effective functioning of any community. We have several projects, both with regards to transport and other green infrastructure programmes, to help in reducing our emissions across the city. I'm going to cover some of the major projects that the city is doing to decarbonise, including encouraging a shift to public transport and active travel, such as walking and cycling, further decarbonisation of road vehicles, and increasing the amount of EV charging points in the city and neighbourhoods, and reducing the city's carbon footprint. So electric buses. So the Department for Transport launched the All Electric Bus Town Fund in February 2020, with 50 million made available in grant funding. Coventry Council, in partnership with Warwickshire County Council and the Transport for West Midlands, developed an expression of interest to the government's All Electric Bus Town funding competition. There were a total of 19 expressions of interest submitted, and the Department for Transport confirmed that Coventry and Warwickshire's bid had been shortlisted alongside 9 other cities. And there was a second bid also from Oxford City Council. The DFT confirmed that both cities would receive the funding and then passported that 50 million in capital grant funding for the All Electric Bus Town programme to the West Midlands Combined Authority. So the timetable for implementing the all-electric buses operating in the city, being electric, is by the end of 2025. My colleague Shamala Evans is the project manager of the programme, and she's here today to answer any questions you may have at the end of the presentation. Another project that the council is heavily involved in is the Very Light Rail. So the challenge of future mobility is being addressed by using battery technology to create a new very light rail system in Coventry. This is the first one in the UK. The vehicles will be battery operated using rapid charging solutions, which means they will not require overhead cables like a traditional tram system. So Warwick Manufacturing Group and Warwick School of Engineering are also developing a track solution, which will be lightweight, low cost and easily embedded into the roads. And the first VLR route will connect the city centre to University Hospital and establish the city as a trailblazer in new technology and helping to improve air quality and reduce congestion. EV charging. So there's ongoing projects, of course, including electric vehicles and charging infrastructure development. So Coventry City Council has partnered with EO Charging to create an open fast charging network. The Plug-in Coventry scheme, it's available for workplaces to obtain chargers at their premises with fully funded installation of the EO fast chargers. Currently, the network of charging points accessible to the public of Coventry is now 460. Now, this is more than any other local authority in the whole of the UK outside of London. And there's just some images of slow and fast chargers that have been installed by Connected Curb on residential streets in Coventry. Thanks to funding also from Highways England, Coventry City Council is providing electric vehicles for local organisations with a try before you buy or trial scheme of a minimum 2-month period, and the only cost to the organisation is the insurance cover over that period. Taxi trade can also trial electric taxis for a minimum of 1-month period, and this 2-year project will support efforts to reduce NO2 emissions on the local road network, and businesses can register their interest on the council website if anyone is interested today to find out more about that. Thinking about cycling and increasing that in the city, West Midlands Cycle Hire has started rolling out its bikes in towns and cities across the region. The Transport for West Midlands scheme has now been launched in Coventry, and bikes are available to hire 24/7. So there's a number of docking stations are located in key locations around the city, and this is all part of our active travel plans. We've also secured government funding to promote active travel. So permanent cycle routes to connect the city are being developed. The Cowden cycle route is under construction, and that will be completed by the end of this year. And the Binley cycle route is being designed, and that should be delivered by 2023. And the university routes are partially completed with improved and extended routes by 2022. Those that have been into Coventry recently will notice the redevelopment of the station building, and a new multi-storey car park is nearly completed. So the Coventry Station Master Plan has been developed to provide a fitting gateway to the city as we enter the City of Coventry year, delivering high quality infrastructure and a transport interchange to support rail growth. The station will obviously promote physical activity. We hope it will increase efforts to walk and cycle rather than using your car. And we also have an 18-month programme of minor improvements to key junctions planned to improve traffic flows and reduce congestion. I thought I'd mention the National Vehicle Battery Testing Centre. We're home, Coventry's home to that, and it's an innovative partnership between Coventry City Council, the LEP and Warwick Manufacturing Group. So the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre is an open access research facility which supports the transition of the UK to become a world leader in the design, development and manufacture of batteries for vehicle electrification. This has been built in Coventry and is now open. The module and pack assembly line is now operational. Other things not transport related, but I think are important, what we're doing in the city to reduce carbon emissions, is our Coventry and Warwickshire Green Business Programme. So this is an ERDF funded programme for SMEs and organisations in Coventry and Warwickshire to help businesses become more energy resource efficient and make the most of low carbon opportunities. So it's aimed at SMEs. So an organisation that employs fewer than 250 people, doesn't have a turnover exceeding 50 million euros, and it has at least 50% of its sales through business to business operations. We go into premises in Coventry and Warwickshire and we give them free energy audits on how they can reduce their energy, become more carbon efficient. And from that, they can receive 40% funding towards energy efficient measures such as solar panels on the roof, better insulation, LED lighting throughout their factories, etc., etc. Some of our highlights over the last 3 years since we've been helping businesses is that we've assisted over 400 businesses to date, and that's equated to saving 14,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions in our region. We've allocated 4 million in grant funding to support these businesses, and by providing grant funding, new jobs have been created within the businesses. And to date, 1,450 organisations have joined our Green Business Network. The Green Business Network is free to join, and part of it is so we can get organisations within our region engaging with us on what we're doing as a council and further afield. We run lots of events and workshops, and our next event's tomorrow on a pathway to a circular economy. We have a monthly newsletter and we provide expert advice. So there's free advice attainable through our sustainability consultants that work at the council. And we also signpost organisations to other grants that we have, including business support, innovation and skills for growth. And we have supply chain opportunities for businesses to get involved with other businesses through our Green Business Directory. The council is also currently working on a climate change strategy. Our current strategy came to an end at the end of last year, and although we hit our target 6 years early, we still know there's a lot more to do. So our current, we're reviewing our climate change strategy, which we based on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And we're working at the moment to establish an independent commission of stakeholders, and that will include businesses in the region, communities, voluntary organisations across the city, into developing this new climate change strategy and action plan. So my final slide then is all about thinking about affecting change. So when we entered a COVID world a year ago, we didn't know what to expect. The remote world of working has enabled us to look at good changes and opportunities we can make to affect change in a post-COVID world. More than ever, it's made us aware of the impacts upon the environment and sustainability. We have some successes with new ways of working and developing partnerships to enable us to make those changes around digital transformation to manage air quality. With more people appreciating nature and green spaces around them, it gives us a real opportunity to promote active travel and how we use public transport in a post-COVID world. We have the opportunity to change the way people use the city in the future, and we want it to be a place for people and not just cars. We want to create green spaces in the city so people want to live and socialise there. And we'll also be pushing for funding for addressing fuel and food poverty and making homes more energy efficient. So educating people about food growing, both local and organic, through our food networks, and engaging with our communities to affect this change that we're looking for. So thank you. And obviously any questions we'll answer in the Q&A session at the end. And thank you for inviting me today.
Denise, thank you very much for such a really insightful presentation, which I didn't realise how much our region was really covering in terms of this net zero ambition with all the things that are there for businesses to be able to access, for people, and is definitely a step in the right direction. And it's so great to see not just our university is leading on that, but also our local authority. So thank you for a really great presentation. I look forward to hearing you answer some questions right at the end. So from our universities leading on net zero to our local authority, we're now going to move over to how our government can play a role in this and how they can incentivise that change. We're joined this morning by Mark Pawsey, the MP for Rugby. And Mark, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you very much to the earlier two speakers. I've learned a great deal already, and I'm very much looking forward to the electrification of the buses and the Stagecoach 56 service, which goes from Coventry to Rugby, which is the one that I used to take to go from to school when I lived in Binley Woods. So it's a county-wide thing, so we will all be sharing in that. I just wanted to give you 1 or 2 points that are happening in Parliament, and as you will know, the UK was the very first major economy to pass net zero emission laws, and we've got the ambition to bring all greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. And I think it's important that we focus a little bit on the word net zero. It doesn't mean that every activity has to be zero. There are many activities, particularly in industry and most specifically manufacturing, that are not going to be able to get to absolute zero. It's net zero as a country that we want to get to. And I know there are business people on the course and they are on the call, and they will know the difference between a profit and a net profit. There's a great deal. There's a much more to be taken into account. And it's entirely right that in every area of activity, we look at the levels of emissions and we do our utmost to reduce those. And we've heard from both of the speakers as to how we might be able to achieve that. But there will continue to be emissions. And what we will need to do is make certain that we, in addition to minimising the CO2 that we generate, that we take actions to increase the rate of absorption. And many businesses, of course, will have activities such as tree planting in order to compensate for that. I think it's really interesting to hear from the university about how our region's a major hub of innovation, and I'm delighted that's going on. And as you mentioned, Sean, I'm on the Bays Select Committee, and I'm thinking back to the report that we did in the last Parliament about the adoption of electric vehicles. As I've listened to both Paul and Denise's presentations, I think our report went a long way in improving the government's ambition to bring forward the date at which it won't be possible to put a vehicle powered by an internal combustion engine forward from originally 2040 to 2035 and possibly 2030. I have to confess, as somebody with a business background, I had some anxieties about that because of the question mark as to whether our biggest domestic manufacturer was able to modify their product range in time to meet that objective. But we've heard from Jaguar Land Rover recently a very ambitious objectives to get to all electric much sooner than I thought would be the case. We discovered a few things in our inquiry, and I have to say, on that inquiry, we visited the London Electric Vehicle Company at Anstey, which I'm delighted is in my constituency, and I see that very much as a pioneer, because I think for many people, their first experience ever of an electric vehicle will be a journey in a taxi. And in most cases, almost all cases, people are very impressed by the quality of the ride, how quiet the drive is, and taxi drivers are not slow in bringing their opinions forward. And the majority of drivers I know are highly enthusiastic about the new product coming out of the Anstey factory. We did also visit a site in Milton Keynes, which is an opportunity for people to go and try an electric vehicle without the pressure sales that sometimes occurs when people visit car dealerships. Now, I know in the pandemic, people haven't been visiting dealerships in the same way, and they've been gathering information about a new vehicle choice from the internet and from reports and from other sources, rather than a test drive with a pushy salesman sitting in the passenger seat. But I think Milton Keynes is a pioneer in an independent centre where they've got a variety of electric vehicles from different manufacturers, with people having the opportunity to try and see what the implications are. And some independent, impartial advice. And you know, the court visit we made, the staff there were honest enough to say that if you're a sales representative doing 600 miles a week up and down the motorways, not knowing often where you're going from one day to the next, then an electric vehicle may still not be the best vehicle for you. But if you are a regular commuter with a journey of a consistent distance on a regular basis, then for most people, an electric vehicle will be the right opportunity, the right vehicle for them. The other work that we did was based around charging, and I was really pleased to hear what he's saying about Coventry making charging important. I mean, it was with somebody only at the weekend who'd driven from Nottinghamshire to London, had diminished their charge, and then spent an hour driving around trying to find a working charger for them to be able to make the round trip. And it's stories like that that are acting as a real disincentive for people to make the switch to electric vehicles. And I have to say, I was absolutely horrified probably 18 months or so ago when I meant to meet with the people who are developing a new motorway services at junction 1 of the M6 at Rugby. It's another reason why Rugby will be on the map, because people will stop at the motorway services. But the original plan when that site was being developed was to have just 2 chargers. I thought that was absolutely pitiful. I wasn't surprised, because I was involved in a business not very far away who wanted a reasonable amount of power for their manufacturing process. And it took forever to get an electrical supply to their factory site. And I therefore expected there to be a problem at the new motor services. I have to say that by lobbying, shouting at people, kicking and screaming, that will open with 24 charging points. But there will still be the issue of compatibility. There are still some that are exclusively for Tesla users, and they're not universal. And I think we continue to need that work done in that area. I mentioned about the work on the Bay Select Committee, and we are doing quite a lot of work on decarbonisation, certainly looking going up to the COP26 meeting in Glasgow later in the year. And we're doing quite a bit of work on decarbonising heating in homes at the moment. We've done our work on travel, and that's the biggest, when you talk to individuals about how they might modify their behaviour to reduce their emissions, people immediately go to travel. But they very rarely think about the amount of CO2 that's generated by heating their homes. And so we're coming to the end of an inquiry on that, and perhaps it might be something that people would want to follow up on. But the things we're looking at is what technologies are most viable to deliver decarbonised heat in homes, and we're looking at greater use of electricity. And of course, the electricity in those circumstances need to be generated from renewable sources. And we've done a lot of work on substituting hydrogen within the gas grid and steps that can be taken to do that. We're looking at what the barriers are to scaling up to low carbon heating technologies. And one, of course, is the issue of price. Electricity is, as a method of heating your home, has consistently been much more expensive than gas. And the instinct is to go straight to gas. But if we're going to eliminate methane, what's the alternative? Government has had a series of incentives to encourage a change in personal behaviour and has just cancelled one, which is the Green Homes Grant. The government doesn't have a great record of intervening to encourage the right changes, and Green Homes Grant hasn't been successful and has just been stopped. The cost, which was the session we covered on Tuesday, the average home is going to be between £8,000 and £15,000 to decarbonise, and they're going to be expensive processes. We're looking at air source and ground source heat pumps, which are expensive technologies. It is felt that as they become mass market, prices may fall in the same way as we've seen the price of energy generated by wind fall massively as a consequence of increasing the rate of adoption. We're interested in who should coordinate and deliver low carbon heating, and who's going to pick up the bill of these, whether it should fall on consumers, taxpayers and businesses. But the changes do provide real opportunities for businesses across a number of areas. And we, as a select committee, are very much waiting for the government's heat and building strategy, which in government terms is expected any time soon. One of the things we can do immediately, of course, is to put a proportion of hydrogen in the gas system, so we end up with a blended system, and in doing that we can eliminate many millions of tons of generation of carbon dioxide. And a third method of changing the way that we heat our homes to a more carbon efficient system, in addition to heat pumps and hydrogen, is the implementation of more district heating. And I know Coventry has been a pioneer in district heating, and I'm just wondering if there's somebody on the call who knows a little bit more than I know already about the district heating that's available using the heat that's generated at the waste transfer station at Whitley. There have been lots of problems with district heating, not least the fact that it's difficult to charge for the heat, and there's often a great incentive if something is free to abuse it, and there are lots of cases of people having their radiators full on with their windows open in order to maintain a comfortable temperature. But I asked a question of one of our witnesses a session or so ago, and I'm told that the ability to charge effectively for heat in the same way as we charge for either electricity or gas is something that is now available. And I just want to touch on briefly, if I may, decarbonising the way in which we actually create electricity. I mean, Rugby is home to businesses with their core activity in energy generation. Many of the old coal-fired power stations, almost all of which have now been decommissioned, were either built or maintained by the businesses from DEC, AEI, through to Alstom and now General Electric in Rugby. And we are switching over to new methods of power generation. And as I mentioned, we've seen very substantial reductions in the costs of our renewables as more and more wind turbines are developed. And Rugby is also doing some work through a micro business actually called Off-Grid Energy about the use of power storage. And I know that Pivot Power are intending to develop a storage facility in Coventry, and I'm expecting to hear more about that later this week. I did refer to about the fact that we're going to net zero rather than absolute zero. And in Rugby, we have one of the largest emitters of CO2 in an energy intensive industry where they make cement. That's another thing that Rugby's famous for. But at a meeting with Rugby Cement, I heard only a week or two ago that they're intending, in fact, they've already drastically used their use of fossil fuels by replacing coal in their manufacturing process with a product called Climafuel, which is made up from waste materials. And in the same way as that's combusted in Coventry, the waste material is formed into a separate fuel called Climafuel and replaces coal in the production of cement. But what Cemex, the plant operator, are now looking at is injecting hydrogen into the process to eliminate the use of fossil fuels altogether. And of course, if we're going to use hydrogen, then we need to make certain that it's produced by, it's green hydrogen, produced by CO2 efficient methods where electricity is used to generate the hydrogen. And that electricity, of course, needs to be generated by renewable sources. So the government, I'm sure, will be delighted to hear of the developments at both Coventry University and Coventry City Council as it showcases its work at COP26 in Glasgow later in the year. And I'm hoping that Coventry will be there to talk about some of those things. And in conclusion, I just observed that achieving net zero, and I focus on the net zero, will be a team effort. There will be lots of agencies involved, government, local councils, businesses and consumers all have their part to play. There's a real opportunity for innovation, and fantastic to hear of the development work that's taking place at Coventry University. And to achieve the solution will really require a huge collective effort, but I sense that it's one that people are up for and ready to make the change. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Mark. And you echo so many great points there around our race to net zero and how we get there. And I think one thing you said that's completely true is that the demand out there from consumers is there. People want to make that change, but they're not sure how best to do it yet. And you echo that in your comments around even being able to Tesla holding the market on certain plug-in points. And so you're completely right to make that point. One question before we move on to the wider Q&A. So you mentioned about wind farms, and that was a big statement of the Prime Minister at one of his recent conferences. How important do you think the installation of wind farms offshore will help with that transition into net zero?
Well, it already is massively, and actually, I think there's been a transition in people's attitudes in 10 years. I well recall an application for a wind farm in my constituency that arose just after I was elected in 2010, when there was huge local opposition. And we, as a consequence, I think, of that opposition to land-based wind farms, we've developed in the North Sea. But it's patently obvious that it's more expensive to install and maintain on offshore than onshore because of the challenges of access. And I think that people's attitudes to onshore are slowly changing as they've seen that they're not the huge intrusion that they thought they might be. And I think it's quite a parallel with the changing attitudes towards mobile phone masts. Again, I was a councillor before becoming an MP, and in 2005, people would object to a new telephone mast. Now I get emails from people demanding that there are new masts available because the internet connection that they have is dodgy and they want it improved. So it's quite interesting that in the areas of public attitudes, they change over time.
And it all feeds into that wider narrative. But wind farms, green technology, it all feeds into that grid that people can access. So if we move into our Q&A session now with everyone, thank you very much, Mark. I'm going to read out some of the questions we've got here. And Paul, the first one is for you. So how does a vehicle of the size of the pods you were showing us solve congestion? And how would it work in low traffic neighbourhoods, was the question from Keith.
Yeah, so I suppose just a reminder that the pod is an example of future technology or a future solution, which showcased some of those things. So the pod could help in that what we're trying to do is to take people out of private cars, one person in a car in their own private bubble, and provide them with a similar experience within a shared vehicle. So the very act of just putting a number of people into one vehicle rather than a sole driver would help with that congestion.
Thank you very much. I think if we ask a question to the whole panel, I believe Denise and Shamla will appear on the screen at any second, just as I said it. It's like it works by magic. So as a panel, what do you think is going to be the biggest change for our region in green transport? So what do you think that investment is going to be? Is it going to be the green buses? Is it going to be, as Paul says, this the phone application to order your own vehicles? Or as Mark says, will it be taxes? What do you think as a panel will be the biggest unlocker to change public perception of green transport? Mark,
well,
to start with Shamla.
I'll just come in quickly. What I would say is it's a combination of things, that it cannot be just one or the other. It's, and also private cars, they will play a part in this. I think the fact that private vehicle ownership will probably change over time. It will, have more public transport orientated, so like car clubs and that kind of applications, rather than physically owning a vehicle. So it's a combination rather than just a single solution for this.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's about changing people's behaviour and how they think, and bringing people on the journey. So we need to get the comms right as well, and that strategy, because that's really important. It's all right investing in all these things, but we've got to get people to do it.
And I would say the same. I'd echo those comments. So, there'll be a number of solutions, but they need to be designed with knowledge of how people use them in order to remove barriers to adoption. So, for example, we've heard about all those wonderful electric vehicle initiatives. By very nature, they tend to have bollards at the bottom to stop cars impacting them. So wheelchair users at the moment, whose lives are liberated by cars, adapted cars, are finding electric charging very difficult to do. So again, we need to understand who are our customers and to design the solutions for everyone in the population.
I think charging infrastructure is also changing. It can't be just the one type, as in plug-in or sort of a catenary type. There has to be a number of different types of charging solutions, which are coming in the market anyway, with the static induction charging, dynamic wireless charging. All the different types will help what Paul just said, with different types of people and vehicles.
And Sean, can I pick up Shimla's point about sort of car sharing initiatives? And those have been tried quite a lot, but haven't tended to work. And one of the problems we've got is that car ownership is a very emotive thing. We love our cars. They're for most people the second most expensive item they buy, and they're a prized possession. And the switch to electric vehicles has really been only available to relatively well-off people recently, despite a government grant that you can't buy a new electric vehicle, I think, for much less than £30,000. And there is really no second-hand market yet because they haven't been around long enough. I think what will happen will be people talking to one another, getting to hearing enthusiasts about electric cars will transmit that down, and people will then be able to buy a second-hand electric vehicle, and that will effect the change. I think travelling in a taxi will be great. Getting people to try car sharing will be great, but still people want the pride of possession. And I do think we've got some work to do on attitudes to public transport. It's quite interesting. I spent half of my week in London, of course, where there is a completely different attitude to public transport. I have to say that, regrettably, in somewhere like the Midlands, if a high status individual, let's say a business owner, were to arrive at a business meeting on public transport or in a tiny electric vehicle, the assumption might be that A, he had lost his license, or B, he was using his partner's car. Whereas in London, that would be much more normal. And I do think if we can make the quality good, then people transfer. But we also need to deal with those prejudices and get more of a London-centric view of how to use public transport rather than a provincial view of how to use public transport.
But I think it's that access, isn't it? In London, that access is already there. You've got many choices, from e-scooters to the tube. And so by bringing that technology here to the Midlands, you should see that head in the right direction just by having the choice. At the minute, that choice is quite lacking for people, I would argue. And another thing to raise, which is another question from our chat facility, is about safety. We spoke about hydrogen a bit earlier and around the batteries that are going to be installed in cars. And the question here is, what are the plans for safety and disposal of batteries, especially if they've been damaged due to a road collision? Is that something any of you on the panel can shed some light on?
I can talk about second use of batteries, largely because the small business that I'm familiar with in Rugby is taking batteries from electric vehicles that still have a great deal of life in them. They're probably don't have enough life in them to continue as in an electric vehicle, but they can be used for storage and is making a second use. So they're effectively being refurbished, assembled together, and being used to store wind energy, for example, at a time when it's not needed to be taken off from the grid. So there will be second use. I don't know enough about the dangers of damage, I'm afraid.
No, you're right, Mark, because we are using similar kind of technology at the bus depot in Coventry. So we have solar panels on the bus depot, which is generating power. And there is a second life battery, which is storing that generated power. So second life use for these batteries is there. It's established sort of business in a way. What happens to a collision electric vehicle? I suppose with I think AA and RAC, they have got quite good sort of solutions at disposal side, as well as, you know, when you get stuck on a motorway, for example, because you run out of charge, they have these mobile vehicles as well. So I'm assuming, this is again, I don't know for sure, and we haven't come across that problem as yet. As a city council, what would happen to a collision?
That's the thing, isn't it? It's so new at the minute. We're all tackling with these perceptions that people have. They feel nervous about how do I charge my vehicle? What happens if? And we haven't got those answers yet. And it's a case of it rolling out. A really interesting question here. 32 million cars are on the UK roads. Can charging stations and the national grid cope with that mass volume?
Yeah, they can. You don't have to charge every day. A car doesn't need to be charged. I mean, this is, again, we have done a lot of consultation whilst installing so many chargers. And one of the perception that people tend to have is that if I buy an electric vehicle, I have to charge every day like a phone. You don't. It is all relevant or relative to the mileage that you end up doing. You know, I have an electric car. I charge, if you do sort of average statistics show that about 50 miles a week tend to be sort of average what a person drives, and you just need to charge once every fortnight, depending on the battery size of your vehicle. So there is awareness involvement. You know, there needs to be awareness campaigns by the government, by the local authorities. There is a lot of information available on internet, but that is not enough. You know, there is pertinent information that needs to be promoted by bodies or organizations like OZEB or DFT or BASE, along with local authorities. It is very important that people understand the differences when they make choices.
It is, however, important, Sean, that there will need to be some reinforcement of the grid and the supply to our homes. And one of the things I know that power suppliers are looking at is things like take-up of electric vehicles in order to put the infrastructure in the right place. And the other bit as part of this mix is the use of smart meters in having a differential rate for electricity, so that people will be encouraged to charge their cars overnight, for example, rather than plug it in when they get home from work at 6 o'clock, when everybody else is cooking and heating their homes. We can use price to encourage people to use the right electricity for the right purpose at the right time.
Yeah, so sort of like a sustainability wise around different areas, that the vehicle to grid project is also being rolled out at the moment. There is a lot Electric Nation. Again, data is available on the internet on WPD, which is Western Power Distribution website. Lot of projects. It is early stages, you know, to all of this. So there are a lot of solutions that are being piloted, being looked at, and they will need to be integrated to form. So WPD is also looking at new developments to have three-phase supplies, for example. You know, so it is ongoing process, really.
And that's what's fantastic. And that's what this session this morning has done, has given our council the opportunity to talk about the fantastic work that's happening across the region in terms of the Green Business Network. And there's a lot of opportunity for businesses there to access and get that audit done so they can make them steps in the right direction. So anybody that's on the call that owns a business, I would absolutely encourage you to reach out to that programme and get some support there. It was great to hear from Paul and the fantastic work that Coventry University is leading on, and the direction and showing us that the future really is here now, and that top level thinking is really happening to make sure that our region is a leader in this space. And Mark, thank you very much to you for taking the time to join us and show us how the government are implementing these policies and these procedures to make sure that change happens naturally. I'm a bit of a stickler for time. We've slightly run over by 2 minutes. So I would like to thank you as the panel very much for joining us this morning on this session. I'd like to thank you as all the delegates for taking the time to ask questions and be engaged. And it shows that there's that huge appetite out there for us to engage in this programme. And rest assured, your Chamber of Commerce and Coventry University will partner again with our members of Parliament, our councils, to make sure we bring another event similar to this so we can continue this really important conversation. But for now, to our panel, thank you very much for joining us this morning.